Garden Success is brought to you in part by Martha's Bloomers, offering an expansive collection of plants and tools for the gardener, a boutique store filled with art and home decor, and an award-winning full-service restaurant featuring handcrafted meals and desserts. Martha's Bloomers, located right off Highway 6 in Navasota.
Welcome to Garden Success with Stephen Brueggerhoff, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Stephen Brueggerhoff.
Well, howdy everyone, and welcome to Garden Success. Another beautiful day. Fall is finally here. I don't know about you, but we received upper 30s last night, I believe, if I remember correctly. I'll have to go back and check my data on the recorded temperature for overnight. But the plants are responding. They're slowing down a little bit. That's all right. It's expected for this time of year. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your garden successes and maybe some challenges that you have in your landscape. Feel free to call 979-845-5689. We'll be here for the entire hour, celebrating plants in the landscape and your successes in the landscape as well. We have had a few emails over the past week. I'd like to explore those in just a few moments. But I'll give a shout out to my family and friends, and I hope you do too. You know, we're coming up on a celebration of Thanksgiving next week, and I'm looking forward to celebrating with my family. I believe we'll have a recording for you next Thursday. I'll be in Houston, but we look forward to showcasing a program that we have with the turf manager for the grounds for the recreation fields here. Nick will be sharing some information about his background as well as some of the duties that he has assigned to you. It's a very interesting interview, and I think you'll enjoy the program next Thursday on Garden Success. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about an email that I got in. It's from a devoted listener named Scott. So Scott is a teacher. He confided in me through his email that he doesn't have a chance to listen to the show live, but he does go back to the podcast, and you can do the same thing as well. Remember, on the KAMU website, we do have these programs archived so that you can listen back at your leisure, and then if it might spark some interesting conversations that you can send in through email or prepare to talk with me live on the program the following Thursday at 979-845-5689. So Scott wrote in. He says he's a teacher. He doesn't want to miss a podcast, and he goes back and actively listens to that. But he did pass along a picture, a really good picture, of a pass-along plant that he's received, and it's a night-blooming cereus. So it's a night-blooming cactus. He wanted to know if I could provide some information about general care practices for night-blooming cactus. Now, the image itself is pretty evident of those plants and how they grow, their growth habit. The plants themselves can get quite large. Now, if you know of a night-blooming cactus, what I'm talking about, if you can't recollect that right now, go ahead and type that into a browser at your leisure and see what it looks like. The plants are pretty impressive. They get fairly large. What we look at as possibly a leaf is actually a chlorophytic stem tissue. Right, so when you're looking at a plant like a Thanksgiving cactus or even a night blooming cactus, we're actually looking at stems that are chlorophytic, meaning they're going through the they've got chlorophyll, active chlorophyll in their tissue, and they're working as hard as the leaves that you'll see on trees, and they can get quite large. The stems on night blooming cactus can get, let me think, in a pot, or at least in the one that I'm seeing from Scott, you know, these leaves are at least a good 1 to 2 feet long. Now they are segmented, like if you can think of a Thanksgiving or a Christmas cactus, those have really small stem segments on them. But on a night blooming cactus, the stems are really, really long. Well, I'll get back to that in just a minute. I'd like to welcome Jenny to the program. Hi, Jenny. How are you doing?
Hi, well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing excellent. Welcome to Garden Success.
Thank you. I've got several questions, and I will start with the mulberry tree. I am looking for a mulberry that does well in Brazos County that will survive and thrive in alkaline soil and alkaline water.
A mulberry variety that performs well here. Well, I'll have to do a little bit of research on that, Jenny, to think about that. I know that there are mulberry varietals that are, I don't know if this is the common name or a cultivated name, but they're called the Pakistan mulberries, which are often cultivated for their fruiting, and they are appropriate for our area. But I'll have to do a little bit of research to see if I can see if there is additional varieties that would work well here in the Brazos Valley area. So what is your interest in raising mulberry trees?
I need a quick-growing shade tree, and I would like to have the fruit from it to eat. And so I'm particularly interested in one that will bear good fruit.
Okay. And I'm assuming that you've had mulberry fruit before, right?
Yes.
I mean, they're delicious, but you know, everybody else loves a mulberry too. If you plant them out and you get them growing, you're gonna get great visitation by birds for that tree.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm on acreage, and I like to attract the wildlife, and that's fine. And I've got a place for it that's going to be okay.
Well, they're outstanding, you know, when they do start performing. You know, I remember one walk I had with my wife. We were out in central Texas. I think we were cruising down towards the Pedernales River, and I started hearing this buzzing along the trail, and it started, you know, it sent some sort of it made the hackles on my neck kind of stand up. I'm like, wow, that's an unusual sound. What is that? We got closer to a tree, and the buzzing was coming from you know, hundreds of bees that were attracted to the flowers.
Right.
Yeah, on this mulberry
Right.
tree. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody off, and the bees were not interested in us. They were not interested in us at all. They were busy on that tree. So I'm like, I learned something there. You know, these plants are certainly attractive to quite a number of pollinators and very attractive to bees as well. But, you know, just for our other listeners, don't let that scare you or shy you away from growing a mulberry tree. Certainly, you know, I enjoyed that experience myself.
We have, my daughter lives next to me, and we have she has honey hives and beehives, and they're pretty, these bees are pretty docile. I work with them, you know, I work in and around the plants with them all the time. I'm pretty okay with that. But, okay, well, the Pakistani mulberries, are they red or black?
That's a good question. I believe they're red.
Okay.
I don't think they're white. Right.
Okay.
But I have an idea. If you send me I'm being serious. If you send me an email at gardensuccess@tamu.edu, I'll see if I can find some additional information or varietals that you know, that may be out there, or something that may provide you with some choices rather than just, you know, I've got a red or a black.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. The next question is about a rooting or propagating a Peggy Martin rose, and I need to know things like, should it be placed in a pot or in the ground, and eventually it will go in the ground, and what size hole do I need to dig in my clay, and also how to replace the dirt and what percentage of clay should be in the hole. Okay, so we can start with, do I take it and put it into a little pot and baby it, or can I put it right in the ground, or is this a bad time for that?
So I'm glad you asked that question. As far as rooting a Peggy Martin, I'm assuming it's going to be the same as any other rose. So preparing a cutting, getting a cutting that's at least a good 8 inches long, making sure that you've got several nodes to work with. Peggy Martin, I grew Peggy Martin one year, and if I remember correctly, so when I mentioned the word node, you know what I'm talking about? It's where the leaf, okay, cool. For those listeners at home, a node along the stem is a point of growth, right? So often you can see it's almost like a concentric ring around a stem, and then you'll see a little bit of fleshy growth and another concentric ring. Oftentimes that is the point that indicates how much tissue is grown in a certain time of year, right? But it also can be a place where there's leaf growth or stem growth or flower growth. It's basically it's a point of growth. Is that what we're talking about? It's called a node. So, Jenny, for the node itself, make sure you've got at least a good 4 or 5 nodes on it. So again, 6 to 8 inches length in cutting. I would suggest to try to cultivate that in a container rather than directly in the soil. My grandmother, actually, she's one of those people that could take a stick and put it in the ground and get it to grow and root. But I've not had that success with, I've not had that success with roses myself. So I'd suggest to go ahead and, take a few cuttings, put them in a container, make sure the container is sterilized, and you can easily do that by just washing it out and scrubbing it out really well. I've heard of some people, I've had some colleagues or some friends that insist on taking like a water bath with a little bit of bleach in it to help sterilize the container. I think that you'll be you can do that, but be careful, of course, with bleach. Fumes from it can be a little bit overpowering. It really doesn't take that much to add to water to sterilize it for a container. You could take 1 gallon and maybe a tablespoon, and that would be enough for that. So just wash out that container. It doesn't have to be very big, maybe like a 1 gallon pot, or even one that's smaller quart size, 6-inch container. Just something so that you can take a couple of those cuttings and put them in a media. So sterilize that media as best you can, or just brush it out. Fill it with a sterilized media, or media that you would get from the store, bagged soil. That's a general term for that, is bagged soil, right? Something that is already sterile. I wouldn't pull anything from the ground and put that in the container. It may contain pathogens that the plant could be susceptible to, like fungal pathogens that are in the soil. So that's why I'm suggesting get a sterile media that you can work with. And I've had success with just potting soil. There's some individuals that will say, well, get a mixture of perlite and mix it with bagged soil and whatever. I've worked with this successfully, just getting a bagged media that you would get for containers and propagating it from there. So now you've got a 6 to 8 inch stick, right, with several nodes. Make a fresh cut below the node, maybe about 1/4 of an inch, the bottom node on the stem. Get some rooting hormone. Make sure that you're not dipping that stem into the bottle of hormone. Make sure you separate it out. You can put it in a little condiment container or put it on a plate, something that you can roll that stem in, and just kind of coat it on the outside. When you do put it in the container, make sure you put a pre-press in a hole that's deep enough for that segment to rest in. So the reason that you do that is to not, if you stick it in with the powdered rooting hormone around it, it may brush some of it off. So again, you want to get some depth on it to where you've got at least a couple of nodes sticking down into the soil itself, and then just kind of press the soil around that. Make sure it's well watered, and just watch it. You can increase humidity around that by putting a little tent around the container itself. I've had some individuals that will take like what is it, a 1 liter soda bottle, clear soda bottle, and just cutting off the bottom and using that as a tent over the container itself, just to trap humidity. If it does have some leaves on it, it's okay. The plant will probably naturally drop those leaves over time, but you want that plant is still working, even though it's cut and it's stressed. It's still working through the leaves that it has. So go ahead and retain some leaves on the top of that stick, and again, try out several of them. You can either combine them in one container, maybe 3 at a time, or you can separate them out into individual pots and just water them and keep an eye on them. Don't keep the soil too wet, right? You don't want it like wringing out a sponge. You just want it kind of damp, and just kind of monitor it over time.
Now, how long? Okay, you said 8 inches. The plant that I'm cutting it off of is a pretty young plant. How big around, like in diameter, should it be?
For the stem itself, gosh, what do you think you got? Do you have some older? Well, also, one thing that I left out, I've had more success with stem material that I get that I would call semi-woody. So it's not that, it's not like new growth, which is can lose water, transpire water, and wilt. But it's not that old kind of gray bark that you'll see on that roses will build up over time, that tissue. So it's a semi-woody material, and it's your best estimate to what that is. But I kind of got lost in my dialogue. What were you asking again?
Well, that's what I needed to know, and I understand the semi-woody. Right now, I've got the old gray, and I've got new growth, so I don't really have the right kind of stem to transplant, because the old growth is too short and the new growth is too skinny.
Oh, I hear you. Another. I apologize for interrupting, but another thought just occurred to me, and I'm doing this with a blackberry that I've got. Roses, blackberries, they're in the same plant family. They grow at. Anyway, I don't know if that is related. Just thought that was interesting to share with you. But roses, if you get a cane, especially a vining rose like Peggy Martin, if you have a cane that you can kind of bend down, right? You could if it can reach the ground, you can dig a little hole, remove leaves around the area that you're going to bury in the ground. So literally, it's curving down to the ground. You've dug a little hole, maybe about 6 inches deep, if you can do that. Or even if you've got a little mound you can raise up, just enough to bury that stem tissue in the ground. Remove the leaves for anything that's below ground. I'm trying that with a blackberry right now, and I'm positive it's going to root, right? So you can try that as well if you have enough tissue of that stem to work with.
Oh, that's a great idea. And some of my roses that are not, just regular roses, they've done that around. So that is probably the best way to do that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, now once we get this little rose up and going, and I put it out into its forever home on a fence, how big should the hole be? Because I've got nasty, hard, gray clay.
Oh my, yeah, I hear you. Well, Peggy Martin is known for its endurance, right? What do we call it? The hurricane rose? I think that's what we initially called it before it was shared. So once it's established, it can actually survive and thrive in different soil profiles. But it's a matter of getting it there. So I hear you. You're just trying to get a plant that you're establishing, but you've got soil profile that's not amenable to that initial planting. So I would suggest to go ahead and make a little raised area, right? Almost like a raised bed, but not quite. You're just building a mound that you can put that plant into. So kind of mound up soil a little bit, dig down into the soil profile, so at least it's got contact with the surrounding soil. How much of that, I really couldn't tell you. If you've got a container, a 1 gallon container, right, which oftentimes is, and I'm using my hand so I can look, so I can kind of visualize this. Typically 1 gallon containers are maybe about 10 inches deep. Would you say that's a good estimate?
I would.
Okay. So if you're going to build a mound, I'd say build it up about 5 inches, but you'll use approximately 5 inches of that mound and another 5 to 10 inches in the soil profile itself to put that plant into. So at least you've got some improved soil that you're working with. You could dig a hole that's as deep as the root ball itself, or if it's a 1 gallon container, you could certainly you could dig a hole down at least a good 10 inches that would match the same profile of the container, the containerized soil. Are you with me so far? Right.
I am.
And you could amend the hole itself, but eventually that organic matter that you're adding to it is going to be subsumed in the surrounding soil. It's always going to revert back to the original soil profile, right? So I'm thinking you might be a little bit more successful making it into a kind of a semi-raised bed, right? Something that at least would get it going for a little while. You could plant it, so if you're planting it directly in the ground without a raised bed environment, I would suggest to go ahead and just like you would a tree or a shrub, dig the hole a little bit wider, maybe about 2 times or sometimes even 3 times as wide as the diameter of the top of the container, right? So for trees and shrubs, we say shallow and wide. In other words, you're just burying it as deep as the soil profile of the container itself, or where it's emerging from the container. I would suggest to do the same thing for the hole that you're digging, right? So if it's a 1 gallon pot, typically that's about 8 inches in diameter of the container size. If you're looking at it from the top, dig that hole at least a good 16 inches, and it should be good to go. That would allow those roots to start growing out into the soil profile. For other shrubs and trees, I always mention to just put back in what you took out. And so if you're doing this directly in the soil, I would suggest to do the same. You might add a little bit of organic matter into that planting hole, but keep in mind that eventually that material is going to be incorporated with the surrounding soil. Right? We're trying to get that plant to grow its roots out into the soil profile. So you've got 2 choices. You can build it into a semi-raised bed, but just keep in mind that you've got to continually replenish that. You'll get some erosion. You've got to maintain that profile if you go that route. Or if you put it in the ground, you can put a little bit of organic matter. It may be enough to get it started so that it can grow its roots successfully into the surrounding soil profile.
Do you think that it would help it to give a little bit of the clay as I put in the better soil, to mix some of the clay with it so that it will not get really happy in that nice soil and not grow into that clay?
Yes, you could. Whatever you remove from that planting hole, yes, you could put it in a bucket and mix it with organic matter, right? So that you've got a good mix putting it back in. That's a really good point. The purpose of doing that would be to, if you're just digging a hole and putting in organic matter into the hole, you've got an interface now. You've got a difference of the existing soil texturally with the material that you're putting into the hole itself. That can cause problems. It may be very subtle, but potentially you could be creating an environment where the plant itself never grows its roots out into the surrounding soil. I mean, potentially that could happen. Could be an obstruction. So really good point. Whatever you pull out, go ahead and mix it with some improved matter, organic matter, and then put that over the roots as you're planting it in.
Okay. Well, that brings me to another question. I just planted the Peggy Martin rose just a couple of weeks ago, and we dug a 3x3 root 3x3 hole to put it in, and filled it up with the bagged garden soil, and I put a little of the clay in, and now you got me scared. I put a little bit of pine bark mulch in it, and I did that to help the pH in it. So should I? It hasn't been in the ground that long. Should I go back and start digging around and try to pull some of the pine bark out, or do you think it'll be okay?
Well, so organic matter itself will temporarily lower the pH just a little bit. It's not going to be a long-term fix. You can't put enough organic matter in it over the lifespan of those plants to change the pH of the soil profile itself. So but pine bark, regardless of whether it's mulch, like pine bark mulch, or maybe composted material, there will be a little bit of an adjustment, but it's not going to be enough to acidify that to change the pH of the soil itself, right? It's always going to be a very temporary fix for that. I would if you've just planted it recently, extracting the pine bark mulch, I'd have to give it some thought to think about, how the material itself, how is it going to degrade over time. Mixing pine bark in that soil profile, is it going to improve drainage? It may. As it decomposes, will it cause problems with nutrient availability? I mean, that's a possibility. But primarily, is it going to affect pH? Maybe, but it's going to be so subtle, it's not going to make a difference in the improvement of cultivation of that plant itself. So I'm giving you a lot of maybes and mights.
Well, yeah, it's a gamble in this soil out here. The pH in the soil in some areas runs as high as 9, and I'm kind of desperate to get the pH down when I start trying to build things or grow things. I'm particularly interested in natives, but Peggy Martin is pretty hardy, so I'm going to take a chance.
It is. Yeah, it is. If you have an additional one. So I'm a recent transplant, April 1st, or April Fools, as I like to say. I'm your new horticulturist, April Fools. but I've been working with some of the plants. I came from the Clear Lake area around Houston, South Houston, and the soil profile there has its own challenges, but I don't experience the kind of chlorosis that I'm experiencing here with some of the plants I'm working with. So I've had neighbors tell me that their gardenia is not functioning well. The leaves are turning yellow, and it's a result of the higher pH that we have in our soil profile here. In that case, I mentioned to them, if you're going to try to grow gardenias, grow them in a container, because at least you can control the soil pH, or what you're putting into that, the medium. You can't control that in the soil profile. Now for you, you might be more successful with a raised bed and growing Peggy Martin in that. At least you have an opportunity to with some more inputs, to control that higher pH, right? So I hear you. The Peggy Martin may experience some chlorosis as you move on down the line. Have you grown Peggy Martin before? I can't remember if you told me that or not.
No, this is my first time, and it seems to be pretty hardy. I did mostly collect soil around the land, and a little bit of sand and a little bit of clay, and just I think I just emptied some old pots into one big pot and put it was in a quart pot, and then when it was ready to go, I put it in there. So it seems to have done pretty well. And I've got another question about nutsedge, our favorite grass to hate. And I would like to press the easy button to remove lots of nutsedge out of my veg garden raised bed paths. And I'm building the raised bed garden right now, and it's just loaded with nutsedge. So tell me, what's the easy button to get rid of this stuff?
Oh my goodness. I think repeat application of herbicides. If it's not, if there's no surrounding plants, if it's pretty much a loner, you can apply products that contain an active ingredient called imazaquine in it. Products that have a brand name like Sedge Hammer or Manage might be more beneficial to use. So herbicide application is, unless you're, I believe the former horticulturist here, Skip Richter, he would say, well, you can always eat it. It does produce that little nut, underground nut. Supposedly it's edible, so you could do that. But seriously, unless you're constantly cultivating it, which eventually, you will, it takes a while, but you'll be able to do it. It might be better to go ahead and apply an herbicide to it. If you've got other surrounding plants, you may try, there's a little device that I've seen on the Williamson County website. It's like a little squeegee device, where a little sponge-like device that almost has like the best way for me to put it is a little squeegee, right? So you apply the herbicide appropriate for nutsedge management on this sponge, and literally you're just grasping those individual plants and wiping that herbicide on it. So there are products that you would spray apply that, but it may affect the surrounding plants as well. If it hits it, but at least you've got an opportunity with the device to kind of paint it on those individual leaves as they're emerging, or as they're already emerged. So there's no real good golden rule I can go by, other than you're going to have to try to approach it both cultivating it as well as herbicide application.
Okay. All right, and now the next question is, I've got the central pathway for the garden, the raised beds, is on a pretty steep slope, and I've got some erosion issues I'm going to have to address, and I'm wondering if I put down cardboard on the pathway and put stones over it. I've got to do a pathway covering, because I've got sand on there right now with clay underneath it, and it's eroding. So I've got to stop that, and it's a pretty steep slope. So, and I've still got to walk on it and pull a wagon up and down with it too. I'm thinking about putting cardboard down and putting stones on top, but would it draw ants? Would it come apart? Would it erode underneath the cardboard?
Well, I've actually used I was helping to manage a community garden in Round Rock when I lived around there. Round Rock's a little bit north of Austin, and we did put down cardboard in a pathway to cut down on the weeds that were growing up. I mean, literally, it was a place where we would drag our carts and walk and try to direct people from walking along areas we wanted to be protected. But it wasn't on an incline. But your question was, how quickly will that degrade? That's a really good question. From my own experience, it took a little bit of time for that material to degrade into the soil profile, but I couldn't tell you how long that was. Like, was it a month or 2 months? And we saw more more of that material degrade during the hot summer months than we did, during the cooler, wetter weather. I think that was just coincidental, gosh, you can try it, but I can't tell you for sure how well it's going to work. Does it attract ants? No, I wouldn't say any more than where the ants would normally set up around the yard, right? Where we had it, we had ant mounds that were both in the adjoining landscape as well as in the pathway. I wouldn't say that it attracted ants more than, than the lawn that was sitting next to the pathway. So, I would say experiment with it. If you've got a slope, it's going to add a little bit of slickness to that as well. Well, actually, I did do that. Put down a little bit of cardboard on the side of the house where we had a little bit of an incline. Now, we weren't using it. We were just using it to try to keep the soil from eroding. But we did see, unless we pinned down that cardboard, we did see it slip a little bit, with the mulch that we put on top of it. So I'm not sure how to guide you on that. Putting it down as a sheet mulch, if you're using it strictly for a pathway where there's really, there's still a little bit of oxygen exchange with the atmosphere and the soil profile, it's not like putting it in a bed where you have other plants. You're using it just to kind of keep the soil profile at bay to cut down an erosion, but provide a placement for your paths. That's right? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd say experiment with it. I really couldn't guide you on that note. But one thing that I can say, if you're using cardboard, make sure that you're removing any staples in it, or you'll get a big surprise. I love to walk barefoot through my garden, and you don't want problems with that. But also, you got to take off all the plastic tape that you can. That may degrade, but it's not going to degrade quickly. And the tape can stick up over time. If you're mowing over a path, you'll start shredding that, and sometimes you get the tape stuck. From my personal experience, the tape gets stuck up in the mower rotors. So just remove any of that plastic tape as well. And whatever cardboard that you have that's available would be appropriate to use. I wouldn't go for like the boxes that you see refrigerators, packed in, like the really thick stuff.
Right.
Just run-of-the-mill, quarter-inch thick cardboard should do the trick for you.
Okay. Well, that's all great information, and I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate those questions. They got me thinking. So I'm writing things down so that I will research them and have a better answer the next time.
You did fine. Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for calling. Well, folks, you've got an opportunity to call up and we can talk about some of your successes or challenges that you're having in the garden. 979-845-5689. And I thank Jenny for those questions. I thought they were great. She was talking about sheet mulching with cardboard, but having that to assist with erosion. The challenges she might have, depending on how steep the slope is just pinning that cardboard over the area that she's trying to keep shored up. Jenny, also another thought, you may have a little bit better luck if you terraced steps, depending on how steep that incline is. I know you're wanting to work with carts up and down that path, but if it's too much of an incline and you have an area that you're using as a path, you may want to terrace steps on that, or create actual steps up and down that, then work around the soil on that. And then she asked about propagating Peggy Martin, which I thought was an excellent question and an excellent challenge. There's information that you can't find on the internet, but I do recommend for you listeners, if you're looking for information on the internet, go to a reliable source. Don't just if you put in tag words like propagating rose plants, I would go to either information from a society, a rose society, or a website that has the following tagend.edu. Very important to pay attention to. You know you're getting reliable information if you go to an education source that has investigated some of this, some of these techniques that we're promoting in the landscape. Well, folks, I'd like to revisit and get back to the night blooming cactus with you. So, night blooming cactus, beautiful plant. It's a common name that we use for at least 3 or 4 different species that have a similar range, but they look differently. So night blooming cactus, it could be the one that has that really long, thin blades. They are segmented blades, but oftentimes each blade segment is about 1 to 2 feet long. The bottom line is we're cultivating a tropical or semi-tropical plant for those gorgeous blooms, big white blossoms. Sometimes they're pink depending on the species or variety, and they are opening up at a time where you're trying to sleep. Oftentimes I've seen mine, when it has been in flower, open up around, I've actually stayed up. It starts to open around 2 or 3 in the morning and shuts down right about the time that you're getting up and drinking your first cup of coffee. They're beautiful plants. When the flowers are open, they can be fragrant, and they're just outstanding in the landscape. But Scott was asking, how does he care for it? He couldn't find any information for it readily available to him, and he was wondering how we could also get it to flower. So there's a couple of points on that, Scott, and thank you for submitting that question. So again, the one that we're talking about is night blooming cactus. It has a flatter blade. There's another one that is cultivated for its fruit. It's called dragon fruit, right? But dragon fruit looks a little bit different. Its habit and range, natural distribution, is similar to a night blooming cactus. I'll give you the taxonomic name of the night blooming cactus, the one that we're more familiar with and is grown at homesteads and houses. The botanical name is Epiphyllum oxypetalum. I would spell it out, but it's like spelling out my last name, so we'll just go with that. You'll figure that out phonetically when you're doing an internet search. Epiphyllum oxypetalum is the one that we're looking at. Dragon fruit, which also has the name attached to it, night blooming cactus, is completely different. That one is Selenocerius undatus, right? And dragon fruit is cultivated a little bit differently. The cool thing about the epiphyllum, or epis, as I'll put it, in short term, is that they are both, all 5 species that can be called night blooming cactus, they are true cactus. They are in the cactus plant family, the Cactaceae. So, while they look succulent, they are all cacti. Now, the night blooming cactus, or the epi that we're talking about, the epiphyllum, it does not produce those little spines that you'll see on certain parts of the leaves themselves or the stems. So that's the cool thing about growing epis. They won't produce those little thorns that can be a little bit aggravating if you brush up against them. Now, dragon fruit will, but not the epis, not the night blooming cactus that we're talking about. And they're just glorious when they're in flower. Now, I was also asked by Scott, is Christmas cactus related to that? Well, yes. Christmas cactus produce much smaller, flat-bladed, segmented stems, right? They kind of look like leaves, but they're actually stem tissue, chlorophytic stem tissue. All of these cacti are epiphytic, meaning that they grow in collected organic matter in the nook or a crotch of a tree, right, where the branch connects to the trunk, or maybe where branches kind of segment out and collects enough organic matter. If this plant lands in that spot, right, the vegetative tissue lands in it, starts to root, and then it'll grow from there. So these plants grow in, think of them as growing in a tree, right, not really cultivated on the ground. So Scott was asking, well, I've got it in a container, and he showed me a picture of the container. You can grow it in a container with media or soil that you buy from the store. The way I grow my night blooming cactus, and I sent him some pictures of mine in flower, as well as the vegetation of it, the plant itself. I take a wire hanging basket. I line that with coconut coir, and what I did was I put in a mixture of, it's an orchid mix, and the orchid mix usually contains like bark. Sometimes it's pine bark. I don't think it's cedar, but it's a bark nuggets with charcoal in it. And sometimes there's a little bit of other organic matter mixed in with that. But what I'll do is I'll take half and half. I'll take that orchid mix and a potting soil mix. I'll mix that together and then fill the container that I've just created, right? The basket, wired basket with coconut coir. I'll fill that with that media, and then I'll put my night blooming cactus in that media. So for these plants that grow in a tropical environment from southern Mexico all the way down through Central America to the northernmost part of Brazil, right? They've got a wider distribution. They've been cultivated for tens of years, and folks really just love these plants, and obviously I do as well. So it requires an enriched media that's well draining. Now, I've heard, or I've read, again, doing a little bit of research on the internet, that these plants will flower if they are root bound. Now, I could not verify that information, right? From my own experience, I've grown it. The plant itself is in a container, and it did take a couple of years for it to initiate bloom. It could be related to the fact that it was root bound. I cannot verify that. I need to do a little bit more research to see if there's any veracity to that statement. What does initiate blooming on these plants as well as other plants is photoperiod, right? So placement of this plant is important. For me, I've got it in a hanging basket, replicating how it would thrive in nature, and the exposure that I have is bright but indirect light. So I've got it placed hanging underneath the eaves of my house, of the house that I'm renting, and it's got a southern exposure, right? It's facing the south. Now, if the plant itself, the night blooming cactus, if it gets a little bit too much sun, the leaves will start to pink up a little bit. Think of it, it's not quite like a sunburn, but kind of think of it in those terms, right? The pigmentation in the stems start to get activated and gets a little bit red. If that happens, just back it off a little bit, give it a little bit of less direct light, and the plant will still thrive and survive for you. These plants will bloom with the right amount of dark exposure to darkness, right? So photoperiod, these plants are what we call long day plants. So what that means is they need fewer hours of darkness that will initiate blooming. It's really not about the daytime light that they're exposed to. Rather, it's the nighttime or lack of sunlight that will initiate blooming on these and other plants. So they'll start blooming sometime around, under the right conditions. They'll start blooming around, I would say, late spring. So mine start to flower around May here in central Texas, in the College Station area, as well as in the Houston area where I lived. And they can bloom sporadically all the way up into August or even September. And they're just glorious when they do bloom. So for Scott, make sure that you've got it in a media where the plant can be a little bit root bound. You might set it back if you decide to bump it up to a larger container, right? Make sure it gets a little bit root bound. Put it in a container that will enhance its natural growth habit. These plants produce long leaves and they kind of drape or lean over the pot. And so we want to enhance that by putting them in an area, or support that by putting them in an area where they can grow freely to their own habit. Now, as far as watering these plants, I tend to water them similar to the way that I water my orchids. I make sure that they get a good dousing, right? I just water from the top of the plant itself. You will see it drain through that media. It needs more water and attention during the summer. That just goes, that's just normally a logical way that we treat containerized plants. And then during the fall time, we're going to back off of that a little bit. The plant will undergo a kind of dormancy as we get cooler temperatures. These plants are semi-tropical or tropical plants as well. So that means that if you get a sustained temperature below about 45 degrees during our winter time, you might want to think about providing that a little bit of protection for that plant. During a freeze, that will definitely affect the tissue. The tissue will look like it's melting, right? If you get a hard freeze and that plant's outside and has no protection, it will definitely respond to that. So your best bet for this plant, Scott, is to go ahead and pull it inside, or make sure you've got it closer to the house. It will still get some ambient light if you have it under the, on the porch close to the house. Provide some protection even if it's around 40 to 45 degrees consistently throughout our winter time. The plant will thrive and survive for you. As far as fertilization, well, I haven't had any issues with that, and I really don't fertilize my these epiphytic plants, these night blooming cactus. So I'd caution, unless you see some chlorosis in the leaves, right, a little bit of yellowing that's not related to water saturation, right, it just looks a little pale, you might adjust its light exposure or provide a little bit of liquid fertilizer to it. Household liquid fertilizer that you use on your house plants would work, but I'd use that sparingly. The plant itself will work for you just fine. So Scott, I thank you so much for asking that question. And if I haven't sent you an email just yet, Scott, I'm also in response, which will contain this information that I just imparted to the listeners. I'll also include some pictures of my plant. I'm really proud of my night blooming cactus, and I think you'll enjoy some of the pictures that I have. Now, for those plants, they are in their natural habitat. They are pollinated by bats and moths and other nocturnal animals, right? And we don't have those. We don't have those kind of critters here. I did have a picture that I'm not sharing with Scott. While I have this plant hanging up underneath the eaves, it's got a line of ants that are cruising up and down the stem itself, or that flower stalk. When those plants are in flower, they're pumping a lot of nectar, and it's very attractive to some of those ants. Now, I don't have a problem with the ants getting in the house, not at all. They're just interested. Somehow they crawled up the side of the wall, climbed down that little wire basket, and started cruising up into the flowers themselves. I just thought that was so fascinating. But I've never had any fruit produced off of those plants, and I don't anticipate that to happen. I'm just cultivating them for the beauty of their flowers. So Scott, thank you very much for asking that question. It provided me an opportunity to brush up on my knowledge of night blooming cactus and their related plants. Well, we have a little bit of time, folks. It's about 5 minutes to the hour. I thank y'all very much for listening to Garden Success. We're here with you on a weekly basis starting at 12 o'clock. I'd love to talk about some of your successes as well as some of the challenges that you might have in your landscape. Another thing I'd like to share, of course, we have a frequent person who frequents supports Garden Success as well, sent in some lovely pictures of her successful pepper garden. So thank you very much, Shelby, for sending in those images. They are outstanding, and I'm jealous. It looks like you're creating a salsa as well. My peppers are doing okay. I've been growing out this one variety of jalapeno pepper called Mucho Nacho. I just love the name of that. And these peppers are huge. They're producing a pepper that you would normally wrap in bacon or maybe stuff, stuff with sour cream or cream cheese, and then, wrap it in bacon. They're really large, and I really like that one. They are spicy. I don't know if this is my imagination, but Mucho Nacho tends to get more spicy as it gets older. Might be my imagination, but I just love working with that one, and I've successfully made some escabeche at home. That's pickled vegetables, including jalapenos. So, but your salsa looks yummy, Shelby, so thank you very much for sharing that with us. There's some other things, of course, always going on around town. If you've got a chance, get out to the farmers markets. There's Aggieland Farmers Market in the parking lot of the mall. In College Station, there's also Bryan, the farmers market in Bryan, which is downtown Bryan. And there's additional places that you can go to and frequent. I'm sure there'll be some holiday gifts that you could purchase out in those areas. You could also visit some of our retail outlets around town. There's several. One down in Navasota. There's a couple up here in College Station and Bryan that you can frequent. The important thing is to remember to celebrate these holidays with our family and friends. I know I'm going to be doing that. My son's coming down from up north and celebrating with us in Thanksgiving. I'm looking forward to going over to the Houston area and celebrating with my family around the Christmas holidays as well. So just get out there and celebrate your love of gardening, or just your love of each other with each other during these holidays. I'm going to be taking a little bit of time off, at least this next Thursday. We'll be bringing Garden Success to you, and with an interview with Nick that manages the recreation fields around the campus here. It'll be a very interesting program. So if you have some time, we'd love for you to chime on in and listen to the program and enjoy a little bit of what he would like to share about the work that he's doing, the great work that they're doing to keep our recreational fields up to par. Folks, we'll see you in a couple. We'll see you. I will see you, and you can listen to Garden Success. Of course, next Thursday we'll be back on the air live. The following Thursday after that. Love to share anything that you have. If you'd like, please feel free to email gardensuccess@tamu.edu. Even though I'm taking next Thursday off, Thanksgiving Day, I'll be answering those emails as well. I want to make sure to get back to you in a timely fashion to help you continue to be successful in your gardening endeavors. Folks, until then, y'all have a fantastic holiday. I know I will. Get out there and garden. Cooler weather doesn't mean you have to stop. You can continue to do it. I've got some plants that are coming up by seed, and I'm still cultivating them. The squirrels are beating me to the beets, so I'm calling it a loss on the beets, but I've got other plants that are growing up right now. Bok choy is coming up, it's going strong. Daikon, even though it's not as strong as radishes, still I love cultivating daikon. It's almost like cultivating carrots, which have come up for me as well. I put them out by seed a couple of weeks ago. You still have a chance to raise carrots by seed, so don't be shy about putting them in by seed. I'll be doing that on my time off. I just love to garden, and I know that you do as well. Well, folks, until I hear from you in a couple of weeks, you have a blessed holiday, and of course, I will see you in the garden.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Stephen Brueggerhoff. Join us again next week as Stephen discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.
Garden Success is brought to you in part by Martha's Bloomers, offering an expansive collection of plants and tools for the gardener, a boutique store filled with art and home decor, and an award-winning full-service restaurant featuring handcrafted meals and desserts. Martha's Bloomers, located right off Highway 6 in Navasota.